The dust cloud rose from the horizon like the devil himself was riding toward Florence, Arizona. And Ramsey Porter knew he had maybe 5 minutes before the world turned into a hellish wall of brown fury. It was June of 1883, and the summer had been particularly brutal, drying out the land until the earth itself seemed ready to crack open and swallow everything whole. Ramsey had been riding back from delivering a small herd of cattle to a ranch 20 miles south when he spotted the storm gathering strength. He was still a good mile from town when he saw her, a figure in blue struggling with what looked like an enormous hat box near an overturned wagon on the side of the rutted road. "Get down," he shouted, spurring his horse forward. "Storm's coming fast." The woman looked up, and even through the rising wind and dust, Ramsey could see the panic on her face. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with dark hair already coming loose from its pins. Her wagon had clearly lost a wheel, leaving her stranded with what appeared to be dozens of hat boxes scattered across the ground. "My inventory," she called back, her voice nearly lost in the growing roar of wind. "I cannot leave it." Ramsey reached her side and dismounted in one swift motion. "You will die out here if you stay. Come on." "But these are my entire livelihood," she protested, even as the first real blast of dust-laden wind hit them both, making them stagger. 6 months of work. The sky had turned an ominous brown-gray, and visibility was dropping by the second. Ramsey made a split-second decision. About 100 yards off the road, he had spotted what looked like an old prospector's dugout built into the side of a low hill. It was not much, but it would have to do. "Where are you going?" the woman cried as he started grabbing hat boxes. "There's a dugout over there. Help me carry what you can, but we move now or we die here." His tone left no room for argument. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she immediately started gathering boxes. Ramsey loaded as many as he could carry, balancing 3 large boxes in his arms while somehow maintaining hold of his horse's reins. The woman grabbed 2 more, and they started running toward the dugout. The world was turning brown around them. The wind howled like a living thing, and Ramsey could taste grit between his teeth. His eyes burned and breathing was becoming difficult. Beside him, the woman stumbled, and he dropped the top box to steady her with one hand. "Keep moving," he shouted. They reached the dugout just as the full force of the storm hit. It was indeed an old prospector's shelter, built into the hillside with timber supports and a low door. Ramsey shoved the door open with his shoulder and practically pushed the woman inside before tying his horse to a support beam that extended from the structure. The poor animal would have to weather the storm, but at least it was on the sheltered side of the dugout. He ducked inside and pulled the door shut, just as the world outside became an impenetrable wall of brown. The small space was dim, lit only by the light filtering through cracks in the door and one small window covered with oiled paper. It smelled of earth and old wood, but it was blessedly solid. The woman was coughing, trying to wipe dust from her face with hands that were equally dirty. Ramsey found a canteen on his belt and offered it to her. "Small sips," he said. "We do not know how long we will be here." She nodded gratefully and drank, then used a bit of the water to wipe her eyes. As the initial panic subsided, and his own eyes adjusted to the dim light, Ramsey got his first real look at her. She was beautiful in an understated way, with dark brown eyes that held both intelligence and determination. Her face was heart-shaped, with a small nose and full lips currently pressed together in frustration. Her blue traveling dress was covered in dust, and her hair was a disaster, but there was something about her that made Ramsey's heart beat a little faster. "I am Deanna Carr," she said, extending a dusty hand. And I suppose I should thank you for saving my life, Mr. Ramsey Porter, he replied, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, which he respected. And you are welcome, though I wish we could have saved more of your things. Deanna looked at the 3 hat boxes they had managed to bring in, and her shoulders slumped. Out of 42 boxes, we saved 3, 6 months of work gone. What happened to your wagon? The wheel just gave out, she said, sitting down on one of the boxes with a sigh. The road was rough, and I hit a particularly deep rut. The wheel split right in half. I was trying to figure out what to do when you arrived. Outside, the storm raged. The wind screamed around the dugout, and they could hear debris hitting the walls. Dust found its way through every crack, creating small brown waterfalls in the dim light. Ramsey explored their shelter more thoroughly. It was about 12 feet square, with a dirt floor and rough timber walls reinforced by the earth of the hillside behind them. There was an old cot in one corner, a small iron stove that looked like it might still work, and a wooden crate that held some ancient mining tools. It could be worse, Ramsey said, trying to sound optimistic. This dugout is solid. We will be safe here until the storm passes. How long do these storms typically last? Deanna asked. Anywhere from a few hours to a full day, depending on the wind, Ramsey admitted. But we have water, and I have some jerky in my saddlebag if I can reach it without losing an eye to the storm. Please do not risk it, Deanna said quickly. I would rather be hungry than responsible for your injury. They settled in to wait. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger. The howling wind was a constant presence, and the air inside the dugout grew thick with fine dust, despite their efforts to seal the cracks with cloth from Ramsey's saddlebag. To pass the time and distract from their predicament, they talked. Ramsey learned that Deanna had trained as a milliner in Philadelphia, learning the trade from her aunt, who ran a successful hat shop. She had come west 6 months ago after her parents died in a house fire, seeking a fresh start where memories did not lurk around every corner. I used all my inheritance to set up a shop in Florence, she explained. I spent the last 6 months building relationships with suppliers, creating inventory, and preparing for my grand opening next week. I had traveled to Phoenix to pick up some special materials and to deliver some custom orders. Those 42 boxes represented everything I had planned to stock my shop with. The devastation in her voice was clear, and Ramsey felt his heart go out to her. He knew what it was like to lose everything. His own family ranch had been lost to a combination of drought, disease, and bad luck 3 years ago. Since then, he had been working as a hired hand, taking whatever honest work he could find while slowly saving money to buy land of his own again. I am truly sorry, he said, meaning it. That is a terrible loss. Deanna wiped at her eyes, though whether from emotion or dust, Ramsey could not tell. I suppose I will have to postpone the opening, or cancel it altogether. I do not have the money to replace all that inventory. Each hat takes hours to make, and the materials are expensive. What is in the 3 boxes we saved? Ramsey asked, nodding toward their rescued cargo. Deanna opened the first box carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was an elaborate hat with feathers and silk flowers. Even in the dim light, Ramsey could see it was a work of art. This was a custom order for Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, Deanna said. And this one, she opened the second box, revealing an equally impressive creation with ribbons and lace, was for her daughter's wedding next month. The third box held 4 simpler but still elegant everyday hats. Well, that is something at least, Ramsey said. Those custom orders will bring in some money, will they not? Some, Deanna agreed, but not enough to replace everything I lost. and certainly not enough to make the grand impression I had hoped to make with my shop opening. She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. I had such plans. I was going to be the finest milliner between Phoenix and Tucson. I was going to build something lasting, something that was mine. The passion in her voice stirred something in Ramsey. He understood that hunger for something of your own, something that could not be taken away, or at least something you would fight to keep. You still can, he said. It will just take longer than you planned. Or it will never happen at all, Deanna replied, her voice small. Perhaps this is the universe telling me I was foolish to think I could make it on my own out here. Now that is just dust storm talk, Ramsey said firmly. You are tired, scared, and disappointed. But I saw determination in your eyes when you were trying to save those hat boxes. You were ready to face down that storm rather than lose your work. That is not the kind of person who gives up. Diana looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since they had stumbled into the dugout. Ramsey found himself hoping he did not have too much dirt on his face, then mentally kicked himself for such a vain thought in their current situation. You do not even know me, she said softly. Why do you care whether I give up or not? That was a good question, and Ramsey was not entirely sure of the answer himself. There was something about her that drew him in, something beyond her pretty face. Maybe it was recognizing a kindred spirit, someone else who had lost everything and was trying to build something new from the ashes. Because I know what it is like to lose everything, he said finally. And I know what it is like to wonder if it is even worth trying again, but I also know that giving up is the only way to guarantee failure. The storm continued to rage outside. Hours passed. They talked more, sharing stories of their lives. Deanna spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, of learning to sew from her mother and learning business from her father, who had been a shopkeeper. She talked about her aunt's millinery shop, the smell of new fabric and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with her own hands. Ramsey told her about growing up on a small ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, and the hard work of ranching in Arizona territory. He spoke carefully about losing the family ranch, not wanting to dwell on painful memories, but wanting her to understand that he truly did comprehend loss. What do you do now? Deanna asked. Whatever needs doing, Ramsey replied with a shrug. I've been working for the last few months at the Cowboy ranch, about 10 miles from Florence. They needed help with a cattle drive, and I am good with horses and cattle. The pay is decent, and I am saving every penny I can. For your own ranch, that is the dream, Ramsey admitted. Though at the rate I am saving, I will be an old man before I can afford enough land to make it worthwhile. Perhaps we are both dreamers, Deanna said with a small smile. Perhaps, Ramsey agreed, but I would rather be a dreamer than someone who settles for less than they want from life. As the afternoon wore into evening, the storm finally began to abate. The howling wind diminished to a strong breeze, and the visibility outside improved from 0 to merely terrible. Ramsey ventured out to check on his horse, which had weathered the storm reasonably well, all things considered. He gave the animal some water from his canteen and returned to the dugout. I think we should wait until full dark passes and start back to Florence at first light, he said. Traveling in the dark after a storm like this would be dangerous. We could miss the road entirely or step into a washout. Deanna nodded her agreement. That makes sense, though I confess I am not looking forward to spending the night in this place. It is not the Territorial Hotel, that is for certain, Ramsey said, but it is shelter and we are alive. That counts for something. They shared the jerky from Ramsey's saddlebag, and he found a slightly battered apple that they split between them. It was not much of a dinner, but it was better than nothing. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped, and Diana began to shiver in her thin traveling dress. Without a word, Ramsey removed his vest and draped it over her shoulders. She started to protest, but he held up a hand. "I have been working outside in all weather for years," he said. "I am used to it. You are not. Besides, you need to stay well for your customers. Mrs. Henderson would not be pleased if her hat arrives with you sneezing all over it." Deanna smiled at that and pulled the vest tighter around herself. It smelled of horse and leather and something else, something that was distinctly Ramsey Porter. She found she did not mind it at all. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind die down to occasional gusts. The oiled paper over the window glowed faintly with starlight, and Ramsey realized the sky must have cleared completely. It would be a cold night, but at least the storm had passed. "Thank you," Deanna said suddenly. "Not just for the vest, but for everything. For making me move when I was being stubborn about the hat boxes. For staying positive even though I have been rather melancholy about my situation. And for treating me like a person rather than a helpless woman who needs to be managed." "You are a person," Ramsey said, slightly confused. "Why would I treat you as anything else?" "You would be surprised," Deanna replied with a dry laugh. "Most men I have encountered since coming to Arizona seem to think that a woman alone must be either desperate for a husband or completely incompetent. Usually both." "Then they are fools," Ramsey said bluntly. "You came west on your own, set up a business on your own, and when disaster struck, you fought to save your work rather than collapsing in hysterics. That shows competence and courage to me." In the dim light, he could see Deanna looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "You are an unusual man, Ramsey Porter." "I will take that as a compliment," he replied, feeling warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. The night deepened. They took turns keeping watch, though there was little to watch for besides the possibility of the dugout collapsing, which seemed unlikely given that it had survived this long. When it was Ramsey's turn to rest, he dozed fitfully on the hard dirt floor, his dreams filled with brown eyes and determined smiles. When dawn came, it revealed a transformed landscape. The storm had reshaped the desert, moving sand and dirt, stripping vegetation, and generally rearranging everything it touched. Diana's overturned wagon was barely visible under a drift of sand and debris. The hat boxes that had been scattered on the ground were gone, likely blown halfway to Mexico by now. Ramsey surveyed the damage with a practiced eye. The wagon was a complete loss, but that had been true even before the storm. The important thing now was getting Deanna and her 3 remaining hat boxes back to Florence safely. "My horse can carry both of us plus the boxes," he said. "It will be slower going, but we should make Florence by midday if we start now." Deanna looked at the remains of her wagon with sad eyes but nodded. "I suppose there is no point in lingering here, though I will need to arrange for someone to come out and salvage what they can of the wagon. The frame might be worth something." They loaded the 3 precious hat boxes carefully, securing them with rope to keep them safe during the ride. Then came the awkward matter of mounting up. Ramsey's horse was a sturdy gelding named Copper, patient and reliable, but adding a second rider was not something he did often. Ramsey mounted first, then reached down to help Deanna up. She hesitated for just a moment, then took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. It required her to sit very close, her arms wrapping around his waist to keep her balance. Ramsey tried to ignore how aware he was of her presence, the warmth of her against his back, the way her hands felt clasped at his stomach. "Ready?" he asked, his voice coming out slightly rough. "Ready," Deanna confirmed. They set off at a careful walk. The road was difficult to follow in places where the storm had obscured it, but Ramsey had a good sense of direction and knew the area well enough to keep them on track. As they rode, the morning sun grew stronger, promising another hot day. The landscape around them glittered with mica in the disturbed sand, creating an almost otherworldly beauty. "It is strange," Deanna said after they had been riding for about an hour. "Yesterday I lost everything I had worked for, and I spent the night in a dirt hole in the ground with a complete stranger. Yet somehow I do not feel as devastated as I probably should." "Why do you think that is?" Ramsey asked, curious. "I am not entirely sure," Deanna admitted. "Perhaps because I am alive to be devastated. Or perhaps because that stranger in the dugout reminded me why I came west in the first place. I wanted a fresh start, a chance to prove myself, to build something of my own. One setback does not erase that goal. It just means I have to work harder to achieve it." Ramsey smiled, even though she could not see his face. "That sounds more like the woman who was ready to fight a dust storm over her hat boxes. I think that woman needed a night to feel sorry for herself before she could come back," Deanna said. "Everyone is entitled to that occasionally. I will not argue with that." They rode in silence for a while longer. Then Deanna spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "What will you do when you have saved enough for your ranch?" "Buy land with water access if I can find it," Ramsey said. He had thought about this often enough that the answer came easily. "Start small with cattle and horses. Build it up slowly but steadily. I learned from my father's mistakes. He expanded too fast, took on too much debt, and when hard times came, there was no cushion to fall back on. I will not make the same error." "That sounds like a solid plan," Deanna said. "Slow and steady." "Not as exciting as some might like," Ramsey admitted, "but it is realistic." "Realistic is good," Deanna replied. "Realistic means you have actually thought it through rather than just daydreaming." As Florence came into view in the distance, Ramsey found himself feeling oddly reluctant for their journey to end. Once they reached town, Deanna would return to her life and her shop, and he would ride back to the Calloway ranch. Their paths had crossed by accident, a random encounter during a dust storm, and there was no reason to think they would cross again, except that he wanted them to. Ramsey Porter, who had been too focused on his goals and his savings to pay much attention to women for the past 3 years, found himself very much wanting to see Deanna Carr again. Florence was not a large town, but it was growing. The main street featured a general store, a hotel, a saloon, a bank, a church, a livery, a blacksmith, and various other businesses that served the surrounding ranches and the silver mines in the area. Deanna's millinery shop was at the end of the main street, a small storefront that she rented from the widow who owned the boarding house next door. Ramsey helped Deanna down from copper, then carefully handed down the 3 hat boxes. Deanna stood looking at her shop with an expression that mixed determination and uncertainty. "Well," she said, "I suppose I should get to work figuring out how to salvage this situation. If you need anything," Ramsey began, then paused, not sure exactly what he was offering. Deanna turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his heart skip. "Thank you, Ramsey, for everything. I know I already said that, but I mean it. You did not have to stop, and you certainly did not have to risk your safety to help me save even these few boxes. Most people would have just ridden by." "I am not most people," Ramsey said. "No," Deanna agreed, a soft smile playing at her lips. "You certainly are not." There was a moment of awkward silence, the kind that happens when 2 people do not want to say goodbye but are not sure what else to say. Finally, Ramsey touched the brim of his hat. "I should let you get to your work," he said. "And I need to get back to the ranch before they decide I got blown away by the storm." "Of course," Deanna said. "But Ramsey, I hope I see you again. under better circumstances than a dust storm. "I would like that," Ramsey said, meaning it more than he could express. "I would like that very much." He mounted Copper and started to ride away, but he had only gone a few steps when Deanna called out, "Ramsey." He turned back, and she was smiling, a real genuine smile that lit up her whole face. "When I get my shop properly opened, you had better come by so I can make you a proper hat. I owe you at least that much." "It is a deal," Ramsey called back, grinning. As he rode out of Florence toward the Calloway ranch, Ramsey could not seem to stop smiling. He knew he had work to do and probably some explaining to do about why he was a day late getting back, but all he could think about was dark brown eyes and a woman who faced down disaster with grace and determination. The foreman at the Calloway ranch, a grizzled man named Frank Morrison, took one look at Ramsey's dusty, tired state and simply nodded. "Storm get you?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Ramsey replied. "Had to hole up and wait it out." "You and half the territory," Frank said. "Lost part of the north fence line. Going to need all hands to fix it tomorrow. Get yourself cleaned up and rested. You look like hell." Ramsey did as he was told, washing off the accumulated dust and dirt at the pump behind the bunkhouse, then falling into his narrow bed and sleeping for 12 straight hours. When he woke, the sun was rising on a new day, and his first thought was of Deanna. He wondered how she was doing, whether she had figured out a plan for her shop, whether she was feeling as devastated in the full light of day as she must have felt when she realized the extent of her loss. He wanted to ride into town and check on her, but he had work to do. The Calloways were good employers, and he would not let them down. The next several days were consumed with repairing storm damage. The fence line that had been destroyed required complete reconstruction in some sections. Several head of cattle had wandered off and needed to be rounded up. The roof of one of the barns had partially collapsed and needed fixing. Ramsey worked from sunup to sundown, exhausted but satisfied with honest labor. But in the quiet moments, his thoughts drifted to Deanna. He remembered the feel of her arms around his waist during the ride to Florence, the sound of her voice in the darkness of the dugout, the way she had looked at him when she thanked him for helping her. He wondered if she thought about him too, or if he was just a helpful stranger who had faded from her memory as she dealt with more pressing concerns. A week after the dust storm, Frank Morrison called Ramsey aside after breakfast. "Need you to make a run into Florence," the foreman said. "Pick up some supplies from the general store. Mrs. Calloway has a list. Should not take more than a few hours." Ramsey tried not to look too eager as he agreed. A trip to Florence meant a chance to stop by Deanna's shop to see how she was doing, to maybe. What? He was not sure what he hoped for, only that he wanted to see her again. He made the ride into town mid-morning, timing it so that he would arrive when the shops were open and the main street was busy. The general store was his first stop, where he collected the supplies on Mrs. Calloway's list and arranged for them to be held until he was ready to head back to the ranch. Then, trying to appear casual even though his heart was beating faster than it had any right to, he walked down the main street toward Deanna's millinery shop. The shop had a simple sign hanging above the door: Carr's Millinery Fine Hats for Ladies and Gentlemen. The window display featured several hat stands, though only 2 actually held hats. Ramsey recognized them as 2 of the simpler hats from the 3rd box they had rescued. He hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. What if Deanna did not really want to see him? What if her invitation to visit had just been politeness? What if he was reading too much into what had been simply a shared hardship? Before he could talk himself out of it, the door opened and a well-dressed woman emerged carrying a hat box. She held the door for him with a smile. "Going in. Deanna does wonderful work." "Thank you," Ramsey managed and stepped inside. The shop was small but efficiently laid out. Shelves along the walls held what inventory Diana had managed to assemble. A counter near the back featured a looking glass and several hat stands. Behind the counter was a doorway that presumably led to a workroom. Diana emerged from that doorway carrying a partially completed hat. She wore a simple work dress with an apron over it, and her hair was pulled back in a practical bun. When she saw Ramsey, her face lit up in a way that made his heart soar. "Ramsey," she exclaimed, setting down the hat and coming around the counter. "I had hoped you would stop by." "I was in town picking up supplies for the ranch," he said, which was true if incomplete. "Thought I would see how you were doing." "Come, sit," Diana said, gesturing to a small chair near the counter. "I was just about to make some tea. Will you join me?" "I would like that," Ramsey said. Diana disappeared into the back room and returned a few minutes later with 2 cups of tea. She sat in another chair, arranged so they could talk comfortably. "So," Ramsey said, "how are things?" Diana took a sip of her tea before answering. "Better than I feared, though not as good as I had hoped. Mrs. Henderson and her daughter were both thrilled with their hats. Mrs. Henderson paid me well and has already recommended me to 3 of her friends. I have orders for 6 more hats, which will bring in some income." "That is good news," Ramsey said. "It is," Diana agreed. "But rebuilding my inventory to the point where I can have a proper shop opening is going to take months, maybe even a year. Every hat I make has to be sold rather than added to stock, because I need the money to buy more materials and to pay my rent." "But you are making progress," Ramsey pointed out. "Slow progress is still progress." Diana smiled at him. "You sound like me talking to you in the dugout." "Well, it was good advice then, and it is good advice now," Ramsey said with a grin. They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing easily. Diana told him about the customers she had met, about the challenges of running a business in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, about her hopes and plans for the future. Ramsey found himself sharing more than he usually did, talking about his work at the Cowboy ranch, about his own plans and dreams, about the satisfaction of doing hard physical work and seeing tangible results. "I should let you get back to your work," Ramsey finally said, though he was reluctant to leave. "I am sure you have hats to make." "I do," Diana admitted. "But this was a lovely break. Thank you for stopping by, Ramsey." "I will stop by again if I am in town," Ramsey said, standing up. "If that would be all right with you." "It would be more than all right," Diana said, and the warmth in her voice matched the warmth in her eyes. "I would like that very much." As Ramsey left the shop and headed back to collect his supplies, he felt like he was walking on air. Diana had seemed genuinely happy to see him, and she had invited him to visit again. It was not much, but it was something. Over the following weeks, Ramsey found excuses to ride into Florence whenever he could. Sometimes it was legitimate ranch business. Other times he volunteered for errands that did not strictly need to be run. Each time, he stopped by Diana's millinery shop. Sometimes he only stayed for a few minutes, just long enough to say hello and make sure she was well. Other times, if she was not too busy, they would sit and talk over tea. Slowly, visit by visit, they grew closer. Ramsey learned that Diana had a sharp wit and a talent for seeing humor in difficult situations. She learned that beneath his quiet exterior, Ramsey had strong opinions about everything from politics to the best way to break a horse. They debated, they laughed, they shared stories and dreams. One afternoon in late July, nearly 2 months after the dust storm, Ramsey arrived at the shop to find Diana in an unusual state of excitement. "Something good happened," he said immediately. "I can see it in your face." "The wife of a mine owner came in yesterday," Deanna explained, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. She ordered 12 hats, Ramsey. 12. For herself and her daughters, and she paid half in advance. That is wonderful, Ramsey said, genuinely delighted for her. It means I can finally start building up inventory, Deanna said. Once I finish her order, I will have enough money to buy materials in bulk, which is cheaper, and she has promised to tell all her society friends about my shop. This could be the break I needed. Ramsey found himself grinning at her happiness. You see, I told you not to give up. You did, Deanna agreed, and I am glad I listened to you. There was a moment when their eyes met and something passed between them, something that made Ramsey's breath catch. Deanna felt it too. He could see it in the way her cheeks flushed slightly, the way her smile became softer, more intimate. Deanna, he began, not sure what he was going to say, but knowing he needed to say something. The shop door opened and a customer entered, breaking the moment. Deanna turned to greet the newcomer with professional warmth, and Ramsey took the opportunity to slip out, his heart pounding. He rode back to the ranch in a daze. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. He was falling in love with Deanna Carr. Maybe he had been falling in love with her since that day in the dust storm when she had prioritized her life's work over her safety. Maybe it had been in the dugout when she had been vulnerable but not defeated. Maybe it was in all the small moments since then, the conversations and laughter and comfortable silences. Whenever it had started, there was no denying it now. He loved her. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Ramsey Porter had never been much of a romantic. His life had been consumed by work and survival and saving for a future that always seemed just out of reach. He had never made time for courting or relationships, had never felt the pull strongly enough to divert from his goals. But Deanna made him want to make time. She made him want to divert from his careful plans. She made him imagine a future that included more than just land and cattle. The problem was his financial situation. He was still far from having enough saved to buy land for his ranch. He lived in a bunkhouse with 4 other ranch hands and owned little more than his horse, his saddle, and his clothes. What did he have to offer a woman like Deanna, who was building her own business and making her own way in the world? The question plagued him through the hot August days. He continued to visit Deanna in town, unable to stay away even though every visit made his feelings stronger and his situation seem more impossible. If Deanna noticed his distraction, she did not mention it. She seemed content with their friendship, though sometimes he caught her looking at him with an expression that made him wonder if she might feel something more. One evening in early September, as Ramsey sat on the corral fence watching the sunset, Frank Morrison joined him. "You have been distracted lately," the foreman observed. "Woman trouble," Ramsey was surprised enough to answer honestly. "How did you know?" "I have eyes," Frank said dryly. "You have been riding into Florence every chance you get, and you come back looking like a kicked dog. Does not take a genius to figure out there is a woman involved." "I am still getting my work done," Ramsey said defensively. "Never said you were not," Frank replied. "You are one of the best hands I have got, but even good hands can be improved. What is the problem?" "She does not return your feelings." "I do not know," Ramsey admitted. "I have not told her how I feel." "Why not?" "Because what do I have to offer her?" Ramsey said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "I am a ranch hand with barely $50 saved. She owns her own business. She is smart and beautiful and determined. Why would she want me?" Frank was quiet for a moment, then said, "My wife was a school teacher when I met her. I was breaking horses for 2 bits a day. I figured she would never look twice at a rough character like me." "What did you do?" "I told her how I felt anyway," Frank said. "Figured I would rather be rejected than spend the rest of my life wondering what if." Turned out she had been waiting for me to say something for months. Women appreciate honesty, Porter. If you have feelings for this woman, tell her. Let her decide if you are good enough for her, rather than making that decision on her behalf. Ramsey thought about that long after Frank had left. The old foreman had a point. He had been so focused on his own inadequacies that he had not considered that Deanna might have a say in the matter. She was a grown woman who had proven herself capable of making her own decisions. Who was he to decide what she should or should not want? The question was how to tell her. Ramsey was not good with words, had never been the poetic type, but he had to try. The next day was Sunday, his day off. Ramsey washed and put on his cleanest shirt, then rode into Florence. His heart hammered in his chest the entire way, and he rehearsed different versions of what he wanted to say, rejecting each one as inadequate. Deanna's shop was closed on Sundays, but she lived in rooms above the shop, and he knew she was usually home. He knocked on the door that led to her private quarters, then waited, his mouth dry. Deanna opened the door wearing a simple house dress, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked surprised but pleased to see him. "Ramsey, I was not expecting you today. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Ramsey said. "I was wondering if you might want to take a walk with me. It is a nice day and I thought we could talk." "Of course," Deanna said. "Let me just get my bonnet." They walked through town and out into the desert beyond, following a path that led to a small creek that ran year-round, fed by springs in the nearby mountains. It was a pretty spot, shaded by cottonwood trees and relatively cool even in the September heat. "This is lovely," Deanna said as they sat on a flat rock near the water. "I did not know this was here." "Not many people do," Ramsey said. "It is a bit of a hidden spot." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the burble of the creek and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Ramsey knew he needed to speak, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. "Ramsey," Deanna said gently, "what did you want to talk about?" There was no more putting it off. Ramsey took a deep breath and dove in. "Deanna, I need to tell you something, and I am not sure how to say it properly, so I am just going to say it plain. I have feelings for you, strong feelings. I think about you all the time. I look for excuses to come to town just so I can see you. When something happens, good or bad, you are the first person I want to tell. I know I am just a ranch hand with no prospects to speak of, and you probably do not think of me that way, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know." He stopped, out of breath, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. He could not bring himself to look at her, terrified of what he might see in her face. "Ramsey," Deanna said softly, "look at me." He forced himself to turn and meet her eyes. What he saw there was not pity or rejection. It was warmth, affection, and something that might have been joy. "You foolish man," she said, but she was smiling. "Did you really think your feelings were one-sided?" "What?" Ramsey said, certain he had misheard. "I have feelings for you too," Deanna said, reaching out to take his hand. "I have had them for months. Since that day in the dust storm when you made me run for the dugout, I think. Or maybe it was in the dugout itself, when you were so kind and encouraging even though you had no reason to care about my problems. Or maybe it was all the time since then, when you have stopped by the shop and brightened my day just by being there. You have feelings for me." Ramsey repeated, still trying to process this. "Strong feelings," Deanna confirmed, squeezing his hand. "I have been hoping you would say something, but when you did not, I started to think perhaps I was imagining your interest. I am not the most experienced at this sort of thing." "Neither am I," Ramsey admitted. "I have been so focused on work and saving money that I never made time for anything else, until you." "What made you finally decide to tell me?" Deanna asked. "Frank Morrison, the foreman at the ranch," Ramsey said. He told me I was being foolish, that I should let you decide whether I was good enough for you rather than making that choice myself. Smart man, Deanna said. And for the record, you are more than good enough for me. You are honest, hardworking, kind, and you have always treated me with respect. You have never tried to manage me or tell me what I should do. You have supported my dreams while working toward your own. Those are the qualities that matter, Ramsey, not how much money you have in the bank. Ramsey felt like he might burst from happiness. So what happens now? Now, Deanna said, moving closer to him, I think you should kiss me. Ramsey did not need to be told twice. He leaned in and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded with equal enthusiasm. It was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and exciting and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. I have never done this before, Ramsey admitted. The courting thing, I mean, I am not sure I know how. Neither have I, Deanna said. I suppose we will figure it out together. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and laughing and occasionally kissing, learning the new shape of their relationship. By the time they walked back to town in the golden light of late afternoon, everything had changed, and yet nothing had changed. They were still the same people with the same challenges and goals. But now they were facing them together. The courtship that followed was both conventional and unconventional. Conventional in that Ramsey called on Deanna regularly. They attended church together on Sundays, and he escorted her to town social events when his work schedule allowed. Unconventional in that they were both too practical and too busy for drawn-out romantic gestures. Deanna continued to build her millinery business. The order from the mine owner's wife had been the breakthrough she needed, and word of mouth brought more customers. By October, she was finally able to have a proper shop opening, with the window display full of beautiful hats and the shelves stocked with inventory. Ramsey was there for the opening, dressed in his best clothes, proud to stand beside her as she greeted customers and accepted congratulations. At one point, an older woman asked if he was Deanna's beau, and before Ramsey could answer, Deanna had said firmly, "Yes, he is." It was the first time either of them had put a name to what they were to each other, and Ramsey felt 10 feet tall for the rest of the day. As autumn turned to winter, their relationship deepened. They talked about everything, their pasts, their presents, their hopes for the future. Deanna told him about her parents, about the grief that still sometimes caught her off guard. Ramsey told her about losing the family ranch, about the shame and anger he had felt at failing to save it. "You did not fail," Deanna said firmly when he confessed this. "You were young, and you did the best you could with impossible circumstances. That is not failure. That is survival." Her words helped heal something in him that he had not realized was still wounded. They also talked about their future together, because by this point, it was clear that they had a future together. The question was what shape it would take. "I want my ranch," Ramsey said. "It is still my dream. But I also want you. I do not want to ask you to give up your shop, not when you have worked so hard to make it successful." "And I want you to have your ranch," Deanna said, "but I also want my shop, so we need to figure out how to have both." It was a puzzle without an easy answer. A ranch required someone to be present to care for the animals and the land. A shop required someone to be present to serve customers and make hats. They could not be in two places at once. In December, a potential solution presented itself. Frank Morrison approached Ramsey with a proposition. "The Callaways are getting older," Frank said. "Their kids have all moved to California and they are thinking about selling the ranch. They wanted me to ask if you might be interested in buying it." "Me?" Ramsey said, shocked. "I do not have anywhere near enough money." "They know that," Frank said. "But they also know you are a good hand and trustworthy. They would be willing to sell to you on contract. You make payments over time, and when it is paid off, the ranch is yours. It would take years, but it would be yours. Ramsey could barely believe what he was hearing. The Callaway Ranch was not huge, but it was a solid operation with good water and decent grazing land. It was more than he had dared to hope for. "Why me?" he asked. "Because they want the ranch to go to someone who will care for it properly," Frank said. "And because I recommended you. I told them you were the hardest worker I had ever supervised and the most honest man I knew. That counts for a lot." Ramsey went straight to Diana with the news. She listened, her eyes growing wider as he explained the offer. "This is what you have been working toward," she said when he finished. "You have to say yes." "But what about us?" Ramsey asked. "The ranch is 10 miles from Florence. How would we see each other?" Diana thought for a moment, then said, "What if I moved the shop to the ranch?" "What? Think about it," Diana said, warming to the idea as she spoke. "I could have a workshop at the ranch and make the hats there. Once a week or twice a week, I could bring finished products to Florence for customers to pick up or try on. I could even deliver to homes. It would be different from having a storefront, but it might work. And it would mean we could be together." "You would give up your shop for me?" Ramsey asked, touched and troubled at the same time. "I would not be giving it up," Diana corrected. "I would be adapting it. There is a difference. Besides, I did not come west to be tied to a single building. I came west for freedom and opportunity. This would be both." They talked long into the night, working through the practicalities and the challenges. Finally, as midnight approached, Ramsey took both of Diana's hands in his. "Diana Carr, will you marry me? Will you come to the ranch and build a life with me? I cannot promise it will be easy, and I know I am asking you to take a risk, but I love you. I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Diana's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, Ramsey Porter. Yes, I will marry you, because you are the perfect fit for me. You understand my dreams and support them even when they complicate your own. You treat me as an equal partner, not as someone to be managed or sheltered. You make me laugh and you make me feel safe, and I love you with all my heart." "You are the perfect fit for me," Ramsey echoed, pulling her into his arms. "I did not know I was looking for you until that dust storm brought us together, but now I cannot imagine my life without you." They were married in January of 1884, in the small church in Florence with half the town in attendance. Diana wore a beautiful dress she had sewn herself, and Ramsey wore a new suit purchased for the occasion. Diana's landlady cried through the whole ceremony, and Frank Morrison stood up as Ramsey's best man. After the wedding, they moved to the Callaway Ranch, which was now the Porter Ranch, even though it would take years of payments to truly make it theirs. True to her word, Diana set up a millinery workshop in one of the smaller outbuildings, converting it into a bright, organized space where she could create her hats. The arrangement worked better than either of them had dared hope. Diana made the trip to Florence twice a week, delivering finished hats and taking new orders. Some customers even made the trip out to the ranch to see her, enjoying the excuse for an outing. Her business actually grew rather than shrinking, as the novelty of the ranch milliner attracted attention from all over the territory. Ramsey threw himself into making the ranch profitable. He was up before dawn and working until dark, caring for the growing herd, maintaining fences and buildings, and managing the endless tasks that came with ranching. It was hard work, but it was his work, and that made all the difference. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch of their small ranch house, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and red. Sometimes they talked about their day. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. Always, they were grateful to be together. Their first year of marriage had its challenges. There were droughts and sickness among the cattle. There were slow periods for Diana's business and busy periods when she barely slept trying to keep up with orders. There were disagreements and frustrations and moments when they both questioned whether they had made the right decision. But they worked through each challenge together, learning to communicate, to compromise, and to support each other through the hard times. And there were good times too. There were successful cattle sales and big hat orders. There were quiet mornings and laughter-filled evenings. There were kisses stolen during the day and passionate nights spent in each other's arms. In the spring of 1885, Diana told Ramsey she was pregnant. He was overcome with joy and terror in equal measure. A child would change everything, would add new responsibilities and challenges to their already full lives. But it was also a manifestation of their love, a new adventure they would embark on together. Their son was born in November of 1885, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes. They named him Robert, and from the moment Ramsey held his son for the first time, he knew that every struggle, every sacrifice, every hard day had been worth it to arrive at this moment. Diana proved to be a practical mother, managing to continue her hat-making business around Robert's needs. She had a cradle in her workshop and would work when the baby slept. It was not always easy, but she made it work, and Ramsey did everything he could to help, learning to change diapers and soothe a crying baby in the middle of the night. As Robert grew from a baby to a toddler, the ranch continued to grow as well. Ramsey's hard work and careful management paid off. They were making their payments on time and even beginning to build up a small savings. Diana's millinery business remained steady, though she had deliberately chosen not to expand beyond what she could manage alone. Quality over quantity had become her motto. In the summer of 1887, they took a trip back to Florence for the 4th of July celebration. The town had grown considerably since that day 5 years earlier when Ramsey had first brought Diana there after the dust storm. New businesses had opened, new people had arrived, and the town had a prosperous, settled feeling. They stood on the main street, watching the Independence Day parade with 2-year-old Robert balanced on Ramsey's shoulders. Diana leaned against her husband's free side, content and happy. "You ever regret it?" Ramsey asked quietly. "Giving up your shop in town for the ranch?" Diana looked at him in surprise. "I did not give it up, I moved it. And no, I do not regret it for a second. Do you regret asking me to marry you?" "Not for 1 second of one day," Ramsey said immediately. "Then stop asking silly questions," Diana said with a smile. "We are exactly where we are supposed to be." A familiar voice called out, and they turned to see Frank Morrison approaching with his wife Martha. The two couples had remained close friends, with Frank now working as foreman for a ranch on the other side of Florence. "Porter." "Thought that was you," Frank said. "How is the ranch doing?" "Good," Ramsey said, shaking the older man's hand. "Real good. Should have the whole thing paid off in another 4 years." "That is excellent," Frank said. "You have done well for yourself, both of you have." "Could not have done it without your advice," Ramsey said sincerely. "You told me to tell her how I felt, best advice I ever got." "And you told me not to give up after the dust storm," Diana added. "Also the best advice I ever got." They spent a pleasant hour catching up with Frank and Martha, then continued enjoying the celebration. As the sun set and fireworks began to light up the sky, Ramsey pulled Diana close with his free arm, their son still perched on his shoulders, falling asleep despite the noise. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I love you too," Diana replied. "My perfect fit." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. They had two more children, a daughter they named Clara in 1889 and another son, Thomas, in 1892. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate their growing family, and outbuildings were added and improved. Diana eventually trained an apprentice, a young woman from Florence named Sarah, who came to the ranch 3 days a week to learn the milliner's trade. This allowed Diana to focus more on the custom work she enjoyed most while still maintaining her business. Ramsey became known throughout the territory as a fair, honest rancher who always stood by his word. Young men came to work for him, learning the ranching trade the same way he had learned it years before. He was a firm but fair employer, and his ranch hands were loyal. In 1894, Ramsey made the final payment on the ranch. They celebrated by hosting a party for all their friends and neighbors, with Diana making a special cake and Ramsey providing beef from their own cattle. Frank Morrison gave a toast, reminding everyone of the young ranch hand he had once known who had worked harder than anyone else and never given up on his dream. And he found himself a woman who was just as determined and just as hardworking. Frank concluded, "Here is to Ramsey and Diana Porter, proof that with hard work and love, anything is possible." As the years turned into decades, their love only deepened. They grew older together, their children grew up and started their own lives, and the ranch prospered. Robert showed a talent for working with horses, and eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Clara surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, traveling to Phoenix for training, and then returning to Florence to teach at the growing school. Thomas decided he wanted to learn the millinery trade from his mother, breaking gender conventions but showing such talent that Diana could not deny him. By 1910, Ramsey and Diana were in their early 50s, still active but beginning to slow down a bit. They left more of the physical work to younger people and spent more time simply enjoying the life they had built. One evening in June, almost exactly 27 years after the dust storm that had brought them together, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. A spring rain had left the desert briefly green, and the air smelled of wet earth and sage. "You remember that day?" Diana asked, knowing Ramsey would understand what day she meant. "Every detail," Ramsey replied. "I remember seeing you struggling with those hat boxes and thinking you were the most stubborn woman I had ever met. And I remember thinking you were the most stubborn man," Diana said with a laugh, "insisting we run for that dugout when I wanted to save my inventory." "If I had not insisted, we would both be dead," Ramsey pointed out. "True," Diana agreed. "And if we had not been caught in that storm together, we might never have really met. We would have just been two people in the same town passing each other on the street." "The universe works in strange ways," Ramsey said. "A disaster that seemed like the end of the world brought me the best thing that ever happened to me." "You saved my life that day," Diana said softly, "in more ways than one. I was lost and grieving and not sure I could make it on my own. You showed me I could, and then you showed me I did not have to." "You saved mine too," Ramsey replied. "I was so focused on my goal that I had forgotten to actually live. You taught me that life is about more than just reaching the destination. It is about who you travel with along the way." They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. "If you could go back," Diana said, "to that day before the storm, knowing everything that was going to happen, would you still stop to help me?" "In a heartbeat," Ramsey said without hesitation. "Every single time. I would still insist on trying to save my hat boxes," Diana said with a smile, "and I would still be grateful when you made me see sense, and I would still fall in love with you in that dugout, even though I did not realize it at the time." "Best day of my life," Ramsey said. Even with the dust storm. Mine too, Deanna agreed. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, they remained on the porch, comfortable in each other's presence as they had been for nearly 3 decades. Their children were grown and thriving. Their ranch was prosperous and paid for. Their love had weathered every storm, literal and figurative, and had only grown stronger. In the distance, they could hear Robert calling the horses in for the night and Clara's laughter as she played with her own children who were visiting for the week. Thomas was in his workshop, putting the finishing touches on an elaborate hat for a wealthy client in Phoenix. "We built something good here," Deanna said. "We did," Ramsey agreed. "Together." And there, under the vast Arizona sky, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and their love, Ramsey and Deanna Porter sat together. Proof that sometimes the greatest romances begin in the most unexpected ways, and that true love is not about perfect circumstances, but about two imperfect people who choose to build a life together, one day at a time. The dust storm that had seemed like a disaster had instead been a blessing, bringing together two souls who were indeed perfect fits for each other. From that chance, encounter had grown not just a marriage but a partnership, not just a family but a legacy. They had built a life filled with hard work and laughter, challenges and triumphs, and above all, love. As they finally rose from the porch to head inside for the night, Ramsey held the door for Deanna, and she paused to kiss his cheek. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For stopping that day. For helping me. For loving me. For all of it." "The pleasure has been all mine," Ramsey said, meaning every word. They went inside together, closing the door on another beautiful day in their beautiful life, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, as they had faced everything for the past 27 years. The dust storm had passed long ago, but the love it had kindled burned as bright as ever, a testament to the power of determination, hard work, and two hearts that recognized in each other the perfect fit they had been searching for all along.